Welcome to the It's in Queens podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Simmons, and this is the only podcast that focuses on Queens, the borough that truly has it all. This podcast is brought to you by the Queens Economic Development Corporation, or QEDC, and the Queens Tourism Council. The two organizations showcase Queens as a destination offering something for everyone, whether you live here, you work here, or you are just visiting or plan to visit. This week's episode takes us into the rich world of jazz, where Queens holds a very special place in history. Now, while New Orleans might be the birthplace of jazz, Queens became its true home. Over the decades, more than 100 jazz legends lived in the borough, making it a cornerstone of this iconic genre. We're talking about the likes of Billie Holiday, John Coltrane, Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, and, well, so many more. Queens' connection to jazz goes deep from the 1920s through the present day. The borough has been home to a who's who of jazz greats. Many of these artists lived in neighborhoods like Corona and St. Albans, where they formed a vibrant, supportive musical community. Places like the Louis Armstrong House Museum and Flushing Town Hall continue to celebrate this legacy, offering both history and performances that honor the borough's jazz roots. In fact, Queens has been so pivotal to jazz that it inspired the creation of the Queens Jazz Trail Map, a guide to discovering the many sites in the borough connected to jazz history. It was first issued in 1998, and this map has recently undergone a major update and digital transformation. That brings us to an exciting new development. Flushing Town Hall just launched the first phase of their long-awaited digital Queens Jazz Trail Map earlier this month. The new digital map is designed by Urban Archive and made possible by funding from the QEDC and the Queens Tourism Council. The interactive version builds on the original print map and provides a modern tool for both jazz lovers and history buffs. So I am incredibly excited to bring on my guest this week, Clyde Bullard, the jazz producer at Flushing Town Hall. He's going to tell us more about the map, how it came to be, and what the future holds for this exciting project. Clyde Bullard, welcome to the It's in Queens podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to do this. You and I have a history together. We've passed each other many times in many different events. And so I'm very comfortable with you, and I'm glad to see you.
It's great to speak with you as well. So let's just step back for a moment because, I've been to Flushing Town Hall a number of times, and I was always seeing the Queens Jazz Trail Map, which is, right at the stairwell frame there. So tell me a little about the origins of the map and its evolution from the original version to the new format.
Well, when I first started working at Flushing Town Hall, the map had already been in existence. Illustrations and illustrations by Tony Millionaire and designed by Cindy Ho. But also, Jeff Gottlieb also made major contributions, and Bill Jacobs, who's one of Queen's great jazz musicians, vibraharpist, he passed on. We also have to thank Mark Miller from the Ephemera Press, because they were doing a lot of promotion to selling the map to various organizations and schools. They also sold the Harlem Tour Jazz Maps, a map about all the great places in Harlem. So all these people had created this before I came. I presided over the Queens Jazz Trail Tour for 7 years. When I first joined the organization, Joanne Jones, the original founder, didn't tell me about that. And so one day she says, "Hey, this is yours, baby." I said, "No, you didn't say anything about this." She said, "Clyde, I think you're the best person on staff that can preside over this jazz tour. Please just get it up and running. And after it's up and running, I'll take you off of it."
And she asked you to do this, by the way, because you know of so many jazz legends, but many people might not know how connected Queens is to the history of jazz. I'd love for you to share some of that history with us, because this is going to be eye-opening for some of our listeners when they go, wow, I did not realize how many legends are connected with the borough.
It's a plethora. We could start with one of the greats of the greatest, Tony Bennett from Astoria. Okay. In Jackson Heights, we have three of the great big band leaders for swing: Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, also, let's say in Queens and Adelaide Park, you have Count Basie. These are major swing band leaders Their music was ubiquitous. Not only that, you have in Cambria Heights, you have, Chick Corea who was there. Even our own dear Phil Shap, he lived in Queens as well. Charlie Mingus, Dizzy Gillespie, of course, and the great Louis Armstrong and Corona. Also Jimmy Heath, Clark Terry, Ella Fitzgerald at one point, Billie Holiday, and the list goes on and on and on. Queens had become a very favorite borough because it was kind of an elitist place for people to be who had made it and were making it. It was more rural, more open. People were not living on top of each other. And it gave them a sense, I guess, of having some kind of being lavish in a certain sense. Because Adderley Park in St. Albans is really very beautiful. In fact, many years ago, in the 1920s, I believe, there was a golf course there. So, so you have Fats Waller. You walk a block or two, you're at Count Basie's house and pool. Around the corner from that is Mercer Ellington. Down the street from him is Milt Hinton, the great bassist who they call the Judge. Now, in the 7 years that I presided over the tour, Milt Hinton was probably the only one still there and living, and he let the entire tour come into his house, he and his wife Mona. He had a lot of space. And he would always give everybody who came on the Queens Jazz Trail Tour a trinket or a button, some kind of keepsake. He was a very, very generous man, and a great bass player. And all of the great bass players and musicians in the world call him the Judge. They had actually honored him, I think, at Lincoln Center, where they had maybe 50 or 60 of the top acoustic bass players, all in this one concert honoring him. Now, the Queens Jazz Trail Tour would happen on Saturdays. And because Flushing Town Hall had partnered with a company that no longer exists, it was called NYC and Company. It seemed to be Japanese based and owned, but NYC and Company, if you could afford to join it as an organization, they would promote your product and your events all over the world because they had offices and branches in various major cities. And so their belief was people begin their vacations from where they live. And so they would let them know and make it known, if you do get to New York, you might want to go and see the Queens Jazz Trail Tour if you like jazz. So they also put flyers and magazines on airplanes. So people coming to New York would call in after they got into their hotel and would ask to join the tours. So we had people coming from Japan, Germany, Switzerland, England, all over. And it was doing extremely well. And the Flushing Town Hall's Queens Jazz Trail Tour won the best jazz tour in New York City. It was voted that by the Village Voice in 2004.
So, Clyde, one thing I just want to make sure that our listeners know, not the NYC and Company you mentioned is not the same as the city's tourism entity, NYC and Company, just to differentiate there. But
well, NYC and Company is and was a tourism company. I don't know if it's still in existence anymore.
Oh, it's still around? The city's tourism bureau is still around?
Oh, great. Then it's still there.
Okay. Yeah, because I work with them all the time, folks. They
Yes.
promote a lot of the cultural
At
activities.
that time, I was going down to like 53rd or 54th Street. I think it was on Broadway.
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about. So I just want to get back to something. You've mentioned a number of the legends who are connected with Queens. Give us a secret or two, something that you would love for our listeners to know about a jazz legend or two that they might not have ever thought about.
Well, there's several. There's so many different people. Someone not related to Queens, but Barry Harris. He loved James Brown. And James Brown at once lived also in Adderley Park. Barry Harris, the great pianist and world scholar, so many people have learned from him. He also loved Haagen-Dazs ice cream and sushi.
And you also mentioned Jimmy Heath before. I think that is the last time I've seen you in person, which was the ceremony to dedicate a street.
The naming ceremony. Jimmy Heath, or as they call him, Master Heath, he moved into Corona in 1964, and he lived in the Dory Miller housing complex. Now, Dory Miller was a naval hero because during World War II, when someone was shot, he actually allegedly picked up the machine gun that was riveted to the battleship and shot down several planes, saving the ship. And so the Dory Miller houses, Jimmy Heath lived there, Cannonball Adderley, Clark Terry, a lot of people live there, and that's like 15 minutes, 10 minutes from Flushington Hall. And Jimmy Heath lived there from 1964 until he moved to Loganville, Georgia. His daughter had a great job in a hospital there. And she said, Dad, I can't keep coming to New York to visit you as you're getting older. Why don't you move down here? She found a great house for Jimmy Heath. He went down to see it with his wife, Mona, and he loved it. He told me, Clyde, the house that I'm living in now makes the apartment that we had in Corona look like a matchbox. Because he had in the back of his home, he had grass, a lake, very, very spacious. He had sent me pictures. It was wonderful.
So, Clyde, you mentioned the tours you did for 7 years. They're not happening now, but this map can easily be used for people who want to take a jazz tour on their own through Queens. Talk about how you hope people use this map and about some of the bells and whistles.
An important fact to know is that the Queens Jazz Trail Tour was a two-part tour. Part of it was on the bus or our trolley, driving them through the neighborhoods, and then they would get out in Adderley Park, and the tour guide, Jake, or Boise Schenkel, he would take them walking in front of Lena Horne's house, in front of Fats Waller's house at Adderley Park, where there's an actual plaque, which makes it like a historic landmark. Now, we couldn't go in these homes because they've been bought and they have new people living in there. But we could walk by the addresses of these great jazz artists where they once lived, and that's what the tour would show you, where they once lived. The only person whose home we could go into who was still living there was Milt Hinton, and he's now gone. So it was still very, very exciting and wondrous just to see where they lived, and it's still pretty much a prestigious environment there, an enclave.
And what do you hope how do you want people to use this map?
Well, the map is for someone if anybody who really loves jazz and is interested in the historicity of it, this is a good tool to get an understanding where some of their heroes or the iconic legends that they love once lived. They can walk through it and just in their mind have an imagination of what it might have been like in the 40s, 50s, when all of these iconic people lived there. Now, what we did at Flushington Hall is to create the Queens Jazz Orchestra, which dovetails with the Queens Jazz Trail map. Because my concept was, why hasn't there been an orchestra designed to rejuvenate this music of all the great artists that once lived here? So we had an idea, let's put together an orchestra which would refurbish, rejuvenate, and bring that music to new generations, as well as generate and help to develop next generations of jazz musicians. So we took the idea to Jimmy Heath and asked him would he be the conductor of it and write arrangements. He said yes. And so hence it was born. And because Jimmy Heath was so famous and iconic and well-loved, the Wall Street Journal and many magazines made mention about this new orchestra, which Jimmy Heath would be presiding over. And he led the orchestra successfully until January 19th of 2020, when he passed on. But he passed the baton over to his protege and student, whom he loved, Antonio Hart. And in his own right, he's a fabulous, fabulous musician who has played with many, many of the great jazz artists. And he has been conducting the orchestra and doing a wonderful job. The concerts have been sold out, and the music is really swinging in the tradition that Jimmy Heath would have wanted it to be. As a matter of fact, Mona Heath and Roz Heath, his wife and daughter, bestowed to Antonio Hart one of Jimmy Heath's most famous and important tenor saxophones. They actually gave it to him They wanted him to have it. It almost brought tears to his eyes. It's like Bruce Lee or Muhammad Ali giving you a pair of their boxing gloves. And so they also gave him complete access to all of Jimmy Heath's arrangements for a 17-piece orchestra. And that is the musical arrangements that the Queen's Jazz Orchestra uses.
Now, by the way, we've
Say that
talked
again?
about, we've talked about a lot of names, but there's one name we haven't mentioned yet, a certain Mr. Armstrong.
No doubt about it. He is the father of the organized jazz solo and someone who astonished scholars worldwide and helped jazz to become a ubiquitous art form. And Flushing Town Hall still hosts the Louis Armstrong Legacy Monthly Jazz Jam, presided over by Carol Selthalter, wonderful musician and saxophonist, who still lives in Queens, and Gabrielle Hamilton, who works at Flushing Town Hall and presides over all educational endeavors.
And
So,
not to be confused with Gabrielle Hamilton, the chef. So we say Gabrielle M. Hamilton at Flushing Town Hall.
exactly. Yes, and this Jazz Jam has been growing and growing and going on at least 9 or 10 years now. And now they've amalgamated technology into it where they're actually having people come on and participate from Italy and other countries. So it's really growing. It's something that's really good. It's helping, again, to fulfill that mission of the Queen's Jazz Orchestra, which is to nurture future generations of jazz musicians and people who are interested in jazz.
So in the final minute or two, I just want to make a point of noting that the map, it's not the same map or format as what was issued quite some time ago. There's interactive features. Users can submit content. When you're on your computer, you can also mouse over and call up information from what I
Yes.
understand. Lots more interactivity. I'd love to just get your thoughts on what this moment means to you to see this new version of the Queen's Jazz Trail map come out.
Well, what it means to me is it's a move forward. It's a glimpse into the future. What we were really trying to do at Flushing Town Hall, and we might do someday, is create a jazz matrix. Now, the jazz matrix would be an interactive online service or spot where all the venues in New York City that are presenting jazz on any given day, you tune into the jazz matrix, and boom, Saturday, June 13th, boom, shows at Flushing Town Hall, Lincoln Center, and Brooklyn over here, jazz matrix. So this is moving towards that concept. But this is great because now you could be in Brazil, Cuba, Holland. If you want to learn something about the history of jazz as it relates to Queens, now you can go online and you can access that. Now, the great NEA jazz master and co-founder of the Village Voice, Nat Hantoff, he said, never again should a book be written about the history of jazz that does not include the importance of the borough of Queens. He said, I'm surprised and astonished. How did it get by me all these years? Because Queens is the one place on the planet Earth that has more jazz icons that has lived there than anywhere else you could name. And to talk about all of them, it could take 5 or 10 minutes to name off all the names. And so many of them have made indelible marks in the history of jazz, and they will always be there.
And so as I let you go, I do want to make sure that our listeners know where they can go to check the map out. That is at the website address, queensjazztrailmap.flushingtownhall.org. queensjazztrailmap.flushingtownhall.org. Clyde Bullard, I want to thank you so much for appearing this week on the It's in Queens podcast.
Thank you. And tell your listeners to check in to the Flushing Town Hall website because we have some really interesting, innovative, and out of sight and swing and jazz shows about to happen.
At flushingtownhall.org. Clyde shared some fantastic insights into how this new digital map will connect even more people with Queens' rich jazz history. As he mentioned, The trail map includes more than 100 jazz legends and sites. It's packed with details about where these artists lived, performed, and made history. And one of the unique features of the digital map is that users can interact with it, submitting content and comments that Flushing Town Hall will review and potentially publish. This really makes it a living resource, constantly evolving and growing. So whether you're a jazz fan, a historian, or just a curious visitor, this map has something for everyone. Now, you can get the digital map for free. It's a free resource online, and you just need to head to queenstrailmap.flushingtownhall.org. But if you want to get a printed map, you can head right over to Flushing Town Hall and go into their gift shop. When you visit Flushing Town Hall, you'll find it right there, and that address is 137-35 Northern Boulevard in Queens, and you'll be able to buy a printed version of the map. Now, if you're looking for some things to do in Queens this month, well, we have you covered. That's where Rob Mackay comes in. He's with the QEDC and the Queens Tourism Council. And each and every week, he brings us details on some of the more interesting and exciting events that are happening in the borough. Here's this week's report.
Well, Jeff, I can't turn down talking about New York Bagel Fest, which is coming to Citi Field on Saturday, September 28th from 10 to 4 p.m. It's actually the 5th anniversary of this Bagel Fest, but it's the first time in Queens, and it is going to feature about 50 different bagel exhibitors, along with spreads and other thematic foods. Plus, some of the displayers or vendors, whatever you want to call them, will create special kind of mixes just for the event. So special schmears. There'll also be panel discussions on bagels, immersive experiences involving bagels, learn how to make a bagels, family-friendly bagel games, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And participants will be able to vote for the best bagel and other categories. I think there's something called Schmear of the Year. So I am definitely going and really excited about it. It is at Citi Field, but it is at the Piazza 31 Club, which is, it's actually right. It's part of the Citi Field, so it's right there. Again, it's September 28th, this Saturday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Bagels, and more bagels. Thank you, Jeff. More information, of course, is at It's in Queens. Talk to you soon.
Why, thank you, Rob. That is just a few of the things happening in our borough. The place to go to discover and explore everything that's on the horizon is the It's in Queens website. And that website address, very easy to remember, it'sinqueens.com. And if you're interested in more business-related news, how to help your business or a friend's or a family member's business, well, head right over to the QEDC's website at queensny.org. And when you visit the It's in Queens website or the QEDC's, sign up for their newsletters. You'll get notified about opportunities right in your inbox. And this month or any month, when you visit any place in Queens, for instance, when you're following the Jazz Trail map, snap some photos, share them with us on social media, and tag us. And use the hashtag It's in Queens, because your photo could become our photo of the week. That's it for this week's It's in Queens podcast. I'll see you next week.